Welcome to the AlignRx Pulse podcast, your source for valuable updates and expert guidance to help your pharmacy grow and adapt in today's changing healthcare landscape. In this episode, we are joined by Lucas Coody, Director of Government Affairs at AlignRx. Lucas leads our efforts to advance pro-pharmacy legislation and greater PBM transparency at both the state and federal levels. AlignRx is committed to representing our members' interests in the legislative process, working to shape a stronger future for community pharmacy. But this isn't a job that can be done alone. Every voice matters when it comes to safeguarding the future of community pharmacy. And today, we'll discuss how community pharmacists can engage lawmakers to push for PBM reforms and address the challenges facing their business and their patients. Thank you for joining us today, Lucas. To kick things off, I think it's important to acknowledge that pharmacists have to be well-versed and vigilant when it comes to the many rules and regulations that apply to the industry, but they may not always be so attentive when it comes to the process of crafting those policies. Why would you say it's important for pharmacists to not only be aware, but active in the legislative process?
That's a great question. I remember hearing back in pharmacy school, we had a jurisprudence professor tell us that if you didn't get involved in policy making process, then someone else would, and it was going to be somebody that was likely trying to put you out of business. And so, I remember that striking a chord in pharmacy school, and I remember a number of us getting really engaged then, and then you get out of pharmacy school, you get a job, you kind of get caught up in just the daily, run of running a pharmacy and starting your career. So a lot of people kind of fall out of it. If you're not tied into the legislation or the legislative process, it's something that you just kind of drift further and further away from. And one thing I didn't realize, I guess, so early is how much the policy really does shape the profession. I mean, when you come out of pharmacy school, you are ready to practice at the top of your license. You're ready to perform tests, interpret those tests. You know all of the different gold standards for treatment. You are ready to go out and take care of your communities in the best way possible. But if your legislation isn't worded correctly, or if you don't have the right few sentences in your legislation or in the rules, then you're not going to be able to practice at the top of your license. So I think it's something that we are aware of. I don't know that pharmacists are aware exactly, maybe how important a couple little nuances like the may to shall are, or I don't think we maybe are so aware of just how much that policy has to do with our profession. I think you would see a lot of pharmacy students and a lot of younger pharmacists definitely be more engaged earlier if they realized how much policy really was going to shape their profession.
Absolutely. One thing that struck me when I was preparing for this conversation is that nearly half the Senate and a third of the House delegation have law degrees and have practiced law. And there are 20 physicians across the House and Senate, but there are only 3 pharmacists or pharmacy owners in Congress currently. And beyond that, there's less than 50 pharmacists and or pharmacy owners serving in 27 state legislatures. I'm sure there are professions with less representation, but that has to be a hurdle when it comes to communicating complex issues and how they impact community pharmacy.
Yeah, there's not enough pharmacists in Congress or at the state level, to be honest with you. And it is imperative that we are staying in touch with these folks. You can't know everything. They can't be experts on everything. And to your point, there's not enough of them there. So making sure that we are staying engaged with these folks. I mean, pharmacy, when you try to explain what our day is like and the fights that we go through, try to cram all that down into like an elevator pitch, and you'll realize really quick how difficult it is to explain this to somebody. And then you realize these folks, they don't know what we're talking about. They're not in the healthcare world, maybe. So staying in touch with these folks regularly is key. You can't think that we're going to just say all this to them one time and walk away and it's all done. Like I mentioned, as you try to explain this, you'll realize that, man, pharmacy's and what we're facing today is really difficult to explain. But as I mentioned earlier, if we aren't there fighting for the policy that's going to protect our patients, protect access to our pharmacies, protect our pharmacies, we won't have a profession in a few years. So we've got to be there fighting for ourselves and for our communities that we serve. But it's not a one-time thing. It doesn't take hours and hours and hours or weeks of your time, but it does take repetition, and we need to stay in those folks, stay in their ear for sure.
So let's talk about how to get in their ear that first time. Let's say a community pharmacist hears about a piece of legislation. They want to share their perspective with their state senator or their state representative, but they may not know who those individuals are, much less how to get a hold of them. How do they get started?
Great question. Every state has a find your legislator button, normally right on the homepage of their website there. So that's a great place to start. Just look and see. You don't have to go to the Capitol. You don't have to do anything too crazy. It's all public information and easy for you. There's a number of websites you can just Google. A lot of times, even who's my legislator, and find a number of different resources that'll pop up to help you, usually by your address or zip code. And one thing that's important, I'd say, is if pharmacists, depending on where your pharmacy is located, you might look for where you might have a different legislator for where your actual pharmacy is compared to where your home address is. So look up your legislator. It's real simple. It's real easy. And I would say I think you'll be surprised. You probably know more legislators than you think. I didn't realize when I first got back into the legislative circles, I had a number of connections and relationships that I didn't realize that I knew. There was a lot of names that kind of looked familiar, and I recognized the area, the state they were from, and it turns out you actually know a lot, quite a few more people than you realize. So reach out to your legislator. You don't have to reach out to them during session. If you're interested in contacting them, you're not sure who they are, calling their office, even in the kind of the interim sessions is a great thing to do. I would say don't ever be afraid to call your legislator. That was my fear. I'm so afraid I was going to call and say something that was going to, all of a sudden I'm going to say something wrong and our bill is going to be vetoed and never heard because I called and said something incorrect. But I realized really quickly, 99% of the time you're going to just talk to a legislative assistant who's going to answer the phone, or you're going to go to voicemail, and you're going to leave your message and say, hi, I'm Lucas Coody from Elgin, Oklahoma, and I'm a constituent of the representatives, and this House bill, yada yada, is important for community pharmacy and for us to take care of our patients, and maybe here's one reason why. And then just say, hey, I'd just like to provide my contact information, be a resource if there's ever any pharmacy related issues, or if the legislator would ever like to swing by the pharmacy, would love to have them, and just leave contact info and offer to be a resource is a great way to get started.
So they've made contact. Now, what kind of information is it important to share to tell the story of community pharmacy today?
So I would say initially, they want to know what's affecting their community. And so I would say start off with very simple 1 or 2 problems. Don't try to go the whole kitchen sink at them of here's everything that's wrong with pharmacy in the medical world and what we see. Pick the 1 or 2 things that really kind of keep you up at night and drive you crazy, and just very easily mention those 1 or 2 topics to them, and really kind of see how they respond. Making sure that we don't use too many acronyms, because acronyms are second language for us, but these legislators aren't going to know what all the different acronyms and such mean. So, using common language, explaining 1 or 2 things of what are the issues that you're facing and how is it impacting your community? Is it keeping you from what services are you not able to perform, or what struggles is your community having because of this issue? That's what they want to know, is how their community is being impacted. And then you've got to have data. You need to have a little bit of proof. You can't just say, well, this is happening, this is bad, and that's all. Their legislators are going to be hit by lobbyists, dozens and dozens of lobbyists. So they can't just go up to the Capitol and run a bill or vote for a bill just on because somebody said so. I don't have any data. I didn't see anything. You're going to have at least a little bit of data initially ready to show them or explain to them. But I will say, hold off on the data a little bit. Don't just shove a stack of papers in their face. You're going to confuse them and lose them right off the gate. So picking one or two issues, explain it slowly. Try not to get too crazy and throw everything at them. Have some data ready for when they're ready for it. And I'd say schedule a follow-up session because it's one of those things that you kind of have to slowly give a little bit of info and then let them kind of digest it and take it in, and then have another conversation. And we've seen success with that approach where these legislators, you can kind of turn some of your legislators that may not be experts in pharmacy, then maybe that wasn't one of their fields that they were going to really focus on, but you can kind of have some little mini experts on subject matter, at least when they're at the Capitol and they hear something about why a bill is good or bad. They've already got a little ammo. They're ready. This is something they've heard from you. They've seen some data. They don't just believe every lobbyist, PBM lobbyist that comes into their office, because they've heard and seen data from their local pharmacists to be able to have a good conversation and kind of push back on some of the negative information or incorrect information maybe that they're hearing from lobbyists.
So in the example that I threw out before, a pharmacist heard about a bill, wanted to share their perspective with their representative. Is that the most effective point in the process to make your voice heard? And if not, when is the best time to reach out and engage your legislators?
So the best time to visit with a legislator is when they are not in session. I was at a legislative day here within the last couple of weeks, and was discussing with some of the students that were at the legislative day of how so many of the lobbyists that were in the rotunda with us are take on so many different clients, and they are a lot of them are fighting against the bills that we're there trying to push. And I was pointing out all of just the dozens and dozens of lobbyists that were in the little area that we were in, and I was explaining to the students how these legislators are just getting absolutely beaten with information. I mean, just talk about drinking out of a water hose. They're just getting so much information thrown to them once they're at that Capitol, and once legislative session starts, they're getting folders and handouts and emails just nonstop. And just by pointing out all of the different lobbyists that were there and how some of these lobbyists represent multiple, if not dozens, of clients, it became really evident that, and I guess some of the students even seeing how difficult it was to get a hold of their legislator, or get them maybe off the floor, or get just a minute with them. That all just really tells you if you wait until session starts, you're already behind. You really need to work on your legislators and start these conversations when they're out of session. And you can reach out to them even if you don't have a certain bill or a bill number that you're wanting them to ask for. Again, just reaching out to them, explaining introducing yourself, who you are, where you work, and explaining just a couple of the headaches that you have every day, and a couple of the things that are wrong in our profession. And then again, following up with those folks throughout the year. I think it's great to have a good sit-down meeting, or invite these legislators to your pharmacy. Everything, when everybody's at the Capitol, everybody's dressed up, and everything's just a little more tense. It's kind of an intimidating environment, and those legislators they're tired. They're away from their families. They've been up there for a long time, and again, they've just been getting pelted with information. So if you can reach out to that legislator and get a down-to-earth meeting for coffee, or invite them to your pharmacy and take them behind the counter with you, show them some of the things that you're seeing, it's just a much better environment. The legislators are going to be a lot more, they're going to let their guard down. They're going to be a lot more receptive to what you're saying. They're going to ask better questions, and then invite them back. it's not something again that you can just say meet with them one time and leave it alone. But you've got to start having these conversations in the interim. So when the legislators are not in session, and that's going to help because when it does come time for session, you've already got the foot in the door. You've made the introduction. You've spoken to them. You've spoken to their legislative assistant. Maybe you found out that y'all got some other connections or shared some good stories and have kind of built up that relationship a little bit. You maybe have a cell phone number or a phone number to get a hold of these legislators. So start in the interim. I'll say if you haven't started at all and it is legislative session, don't let that stop you from starting now. It's better to start now than never at all, but definitely focus your efforts on the interim when they are not in session.
Okay, Lucas, this has been great, but one last question before I let you get out of here. So, closing argument, let's say there's a community pharmacist that still is a little bit hesitant. They don't feel like they got anything of value to add to the legislative process, or they're worried about their savviness in speaking with an elected official. What would you say to them to convince them that they need to be a part of this process and actively advocating on their behalf?
Adam, pharmacists, we don't give ourselves enough credit. We are perfectly situated to visit with legislators. We are in the communities that they represent, so that's important. We are one of the most trusted professions year after year, and we're subject matter experts. I mean, we check all the boxes of why we should be visiting with legislators. And you don't have to be a subject matter expert on law. It's something that some pharmacists might be afraid to make that phone call because they aren't as comfortable or familiar with it, or they're afraid they don't know enough. You don't have to be a subject matter expert in law. You have enough knowledge. You are perfectly equipped right now, whether you're a student or you've been out of school for 2 years or 40, 50 years. You've got information and knowledge and wisdom that these legislators need to hear. So don't let anything stop you from picking up that phone call and making a quick 1-minute phone call or writing a quick card to your legislator. Just if nothing else, just saying thank you and offering to be a resource. That goes a really long way. And again, I don't think we give ourselves enough credit.
Well said. Thank you, Lucas. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope that perhaps our listeners have found some inspiration to share their voice and represent the interests of community pharmacy and the patients they serve at the State House or on Capitol Hill. I would encourage everyone to visit the Government Affairs page on AlignRx.org for more information and useful links and tools like the AlignRx Legislative Tracker, which brings you up-to-date visibility into pending bills impacting pharmacy operations, PBM practices, and patient access on the state and federal levels. Thank you for listening, and please be sure to join us again on the AlignRx Pulse podcast. Goodbye.